The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for yet another educational webinar today. I'm Brittany Piquel, Director of Marketing and Sales with Next Generation. And today we have a special guest with us from First National Bank. His name is Scott Raymond, and he's the Commercial Loan Manager, who's going to talk to us about self-directed IRAs and non-recourse loans, which is the topic I know many of you had expressed interest in and asked questions about in the process of researching real estate investments with an IRA. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes going over some basics for people who are new, because I know some who registered had said that they wanted to understand how self-directed IRAs work, but I'm not going to spend much time because I really want to give Scott the floor today to talk about non-recourse loans. However, just a couple things here before we get started. The broadcast is being recorded. So you will, if you register to attend, you'll receive a copy of the recording via email following the session. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the question box on the right side panel of your screen. We're going to save a little bit of time at the end to talk through those. So if you have any questions, don't be shy. And we'll also provide our direct contact information if you think of anything later or you'd like to follow up with us. So with that, I'm going to jump in. So of course, we want to talk about non-recourse loans today, but we also want to talk about, for those who haven't had any experience with self-directed IRAs, kind of what's involved in having a self-directed IRA and what resources do you need to consult. So as far as Next Generation is concerned, we're the financial institution that would hold your self-directed IRA and provide reporting as necessary on your retirement account, as well as process any transactions and deposits, withdrawals, et cetera, related to the investments. So we're not a bank or a brokerage house, but we're actually just neutral third-party custodian. And our primary objective is actually to do what we're doing today, which is provide education to those who are interested in using self-directed IRAs to ensure that they're using them properly and they understand all the regulations associated with them, to work within those and to be successful investing with their accounts. So just a quick disclaimer, as a follow-up to what I just covered, we are not advisors. So because we're not fiduciaries, we don't have the ability to provide investment advice on any specific investments or to endorse or recommend any companies or their investments, which is why we provide a lot of education around IRS regulations surrounding self-directed IRAs and hopefully enable the investors to do proper due diligence on their own accounts and choose their own investments wisely. So the structure of the company as it relates to holding retirement accounts is has two components. So one is the custodian, as I said earlier, which is within our umbrella here, Next Generation Trust Company. It is a trust company chartered in South Dakota. Just because we're chartered in South Dakota doesn't mean we can only hold IRAs there. It's just that we're regulated by that banking commission there. So we provide all of the record keeping and reporting for tax purposes on these self-directed accounts that we hold. And we also we have an office located in South Dakota, but we also have then the administrative arm located here in New Jersey, which is where I'm hailing from over here. And we provide all the administrative services, which include customer service, account management, investment processing for any transaction. So if you're calling in about your account, you're talking to someone within Next Generation Services, but both the components, which you do need regardless of where you have a self-directed IRA, are held under the Next Generation umbrella. So we don't rely on any outside companies to hold the assets or provide the reporting on the assets. So a self-directed IRA, essentially, as you may or may not know, the primary difference between typical IRAs and self-directed ones is just what you're allowed to hold and what you're allowed to invest in. So it just essentially opens up allowable investments beyond stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and publicly traded assets into alternatives that are not publicly traded. And we're going to talk about what some of those things would include. But from a benefit standpoint, there are a couple of things here and reason why somebody might want to do this. One is that a diversification strategy to hedge against stock market volatility. Obviously, we know how volatile the market can be, and we don't quite have as much control over our return on investment when it's up to the market. When we invest in something that we know and understand, we have the ability to make more decisions and have more control over that ROI. Additionally, the investment earnings in these areas where you might invest today with personal funds, when using an IRA, you get that tax advantage. So your investment earnings are either going to be tax deferred if you have a tax deferred account or tax free if you have a Roth account. So as you can see, it's just meant to be an additional piece of an overall strategy for retirement wealth building. Some of the types of accounts that you can open are your traditional and Roth IRAs. If you're self-employed, SEP IRAs, which allow higher contribution limits, along with simples and other types of qualified plans like solo 401ks or other types of defined benefit or profit sharing plans. And then some of the less common, but also ones that can be self-directed, are Coverdell Education Savings Account for children's education and health savings accounts for tax-free medical expense use. Ways to get funds into a self-directed IRA: you can either make a personal contribution by depositing new funds from either a checking or savings account. You can transfer funds if you have an existing IRA that's held with a brokerage and you want to use some or all of those funds for an alternative investment. They can be transferred from your existing IRA to the new self-directed IRA, and that's a process that we would help facilitate. And a rollover would be utilizing an old 401k or an old employer plan that's no longer active and moving those funds into an IRA environment. And that's something else that can be done as well. There's no limit to how much you can roll over. A conversion would just be moving funds from a tax-deferred account to a Roth account, which would be a taxable event. But the beauty of a Roth account is that your investment earnings grow tax-free, and you can withdraw those tax-free as long as you taking a qualified distribution and you've had the Roth for 5 years. So you can see there are a number of ways to get money into a self-directed IRA, even if you don't have one today. Possible investments include things like real estate notes, private equity. A lot of people do JVs and limited partnerships using a combination of IRAs or IRAs and other personal funds. There are some limits and restrictions around that, but it's definitely something that can be done in certain ways. We have people hold raw land in their IRAs that they develop on, precious metals. People can use IRAs as a tool to lend to other individuals or companies. So you see here, there's a lot of ways you can get creative. The only restrictions on asset classes the IRS puts forth are you can't hold life insurance and collectibles. So I just wanted to provide real quick, if you are interested in real estate, which you probably are if you're listening here, you can hold property directly in your self-directed IRA, or you can do it through an LLC. So there are a couple ways to invest in real estate. You can either buy the property in cash if you have enough to manage the entire project. What we're going to talk about today is if you need financing. You need to get a non-recourse loan through the IRA. You can also partner your IRA with other buyers or other IRAs to use multiple streams of funding to contribute to an investment. And then you can see just the most popular types of investments are typically fix and flips and then buy and holds. All of the profits on sale of property or rental income would go back into the IRA, and they would be tax advantaged earnings. So I'm going to move forward here. One thing that's important to talk about, and one reason I want to highlight the middle bullet here is kind of to allude into what Scott's going to talk about today. So you can use your IRA to do a lot of things, but there are limitations, and the IRS does have rules and restrictions around what you can and can't do. So one of the things that they've done is they've outlined what they consider prohibited transactions, which is basically just an improper transaction between an IRA and what's called a disqualified person. So I'm going to skip ahead real quick and come back, but I want to explain what disqualified persons are as defined by the Internal Revenue Code. They're essentially yourself personally, any spouse, ascendants, descendants, and their spouses. So you can see a lot of the restrictions come into play when you're looking at family relationships. Also fiduciaries of your actual self-directed IRA, which would be an advisor or tax accountant or advisor, anyone that's providing service to your account. So what the IRS says is that you can't invest directly using your self-directed IRA, if it's going to be with any of these disqualified persons, they can't buy anything from you, sell anything to you, lend or borrow. They also can't directly benefit from your IRA's investment. So the middle type of prohibited transaction is what we're going to kind of talk about today, and the reason why non-recourse loans are required if you need to leverage property. So the extension of credit is basically saying here that money can't be lent or credit can't be extended between the self-directed IRA and a disqualified person. So if you think about that list I just showed you, a disqualified person includes yourself personally. And typically, if you get a mortgage, you personally guarantee that, or any loans that you might be getting related to a real estate investment. So here, with your self-directed IRA, you're not permitted to personally guarantee the loan that the IRA is taking, and that is the reason for the non-recourse requirement. So I just want to set the stage for that part of the conversation today. Scott's going to talk more about that. So just other examples of restrictions on real estate that tie back to the prohibited transaction rules and disqualified persons list. The investment has to be for investment purposes only, not for personal short-term gain, because that's not what retirement accounts were designed for. You also can't use personal funds to cover expenses if your IRA bought the property. So the IRA is responsible for all income and expenses associated with the property, which would include things like property tax, insurance, and maintenance, and repairs as well. You also can't put any sweat equity into the property yourself or provided by any disqualified person. The IRS considers that adding value personally to the IRA's investment. So you would need to use third-party contractor or third-party non-disqualified person or company to provide those services. And you also can't live in the property yourself, nor can any disqualified person if you own it with your IRA. They can't rent it either. So there are ways to later in life distribute a property back to yourself from your self-directed IRA, but as long as your IRA owns it, you just need to be aware of these restrictions. So the process and timeline for getting something set up like this would be 1 to 2 days to open your new self-directed IRA with the completion of an application. And then the funding process, which would include one of the or more of the options we talked about earlier, rollover or transfer or contribution, depending on which you're doing and where the funds are currently held, this can take quite some time. The current custodian holding your funds, each of them have their own requirements and processes to let those funds go. So we try to make this as seamless as possible by complying with their requirements and working with you to facilitate that. But there are certain variables out of our control, so you need to be aware that if you're looking to do an investment, you really need to plan ahead by getting your account set up in advance. And then making an investment is going to require you to submit certain paperwork to us as the custodian that we will review for compliance reasons with IRS regulations. Going back to some of the things I covered earlier, we're looking for proper naming of your IRA as the investor or property owner on those documents, not your personal name. And then we're also looking to see if there's any risk of a prohibited transaction, in which case we wouldn't process the investment because our main goal is to keep the tax advantage status of your account. So all in all, anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 weeks in total to maybe sometimes longer in order to get something set up and ready for an investment. So it's definitely important to make sure that you educate yourself prior to wanting to make an investment with a self-directed IRA. I really just skimmed the surface here because I want to give Scott more time. But if you do want to get in contact, you can feel free to reach out. Our website is here, email address for any new account opening questions, and you can call the numbers below and speak with someone immediately. Before I turn it over to Scott, I just want to make sure that, okay, we had a question. I just wanted to check it real quick to make sure it wasn't a technical problem. Okay. Someone asked if it was being recorded, and yes, it is. Okay, so I'm going to now hand everything over to Scott, and he's going to talk more specifically about non-recourse loans.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm going to apologize in advance to everyone. I am not a professional speaker, so if I stumble a little bit, it's simply because this is not something I do for a living. I am a banker by trade, and have been in the banking industry since 1979. Have been doing IRA transactions. The first one I did was probably 76 or 77, and it was a transaction where we actually funded a business that was owned by an LLC that was owned by an IRA. Actually, it was a 401k plan. And so that was my first introduction to doing transactions on a non-recourse basis to an IRA or to a retirement account. And a couple of things that came up when we first did that was, first of all, it was fairly new to the world as far as how these transactions would go. It had been to 2 or 3 different banks the borrower had, and no one would do the transaction because they didn't know exactly how to do it. And I'm a commercial lender by trade, and one of the tenets that we always have in commercial lending is that we do get recourse on all the loans. We have to have personal guarantees. And as we started investigating it, we realized that you can't do that because it then disqualifies the IRA and or retirement account, and could potentially invalidate the IRA and make it a taxable event. So we did the one transaction, hadn't done much of anything since then with that. And I worked for a different bank at that time, and about 2012 or so, I came to work for First National Bank of America, which is the bank I work for now. And in 2013, we made a decision, or I convinced people to make the decision that we ought to look into lending to retirement accounts, because we do the non-recourse loans, but the typical transaction is going to be a lower loan to value than what you would have in a single family home that someone's buying as their personal residence. In addition, the pricing is different. It tends to be a little bit higher simply because you are not getting the full faith and credit of the individual who owns the IRA. And the other thing that it kind of intrigued the people here at the bank was the fact that we would be doing single family, 1 to 4 family, and ultimately multifamily properties all across the country, which is something of a forte of the bank. First National Bank of America is a family-owned bank. It was started in 1955, and the family owned a home building company. And one of the things that periodically they would end up having to do was sell properties on land contract for various reasons, whether it be they didn't have the down payment, credit wasn't available, whatever it happened to be. And they needed a method to fund that. And out of that, through many iterations, became First National Bank of America. Primarily what the bank does is lend to 1 to 4 families all across the country. We have an office in Austin, Texas. We also work with a lot of mortgage companies, and they sell us mortgages, or we buy pools of mortgages from investors. And so I knew that was something that the bank would be very comfortable with, because that's what the main preponderance of the assets of the bank are. So that gets us to about, as I said, 2013, we started getting into the non-recourse lending business. We're one of 3 banks that do this nationwide. All 3 of us are actual financial institutions where you make deposits and withdrawals and get loans and all sorts of things. There is us, First National Bank of America. There is First Western, and there is a bank called NASB, which is North American Savings Bank. The 3 of us will lend pretty much across the country in all 50 states. We have no restrictions as to loan to values and those sorts of things based on various states. The other 2 banks do to some varying degree, but we'll get into that in a moment. Let's see. Okay, so we discussed a little bit about the benefits of having an IRA or having real estate in your IRA, But what are the benefits of actually borrowing money to do this? I mean, after all, it would seem for most people that it's just as easy to do it with your own cash. And you don't have to go through all the rigmarole that a bank makes you go through. So in looking at that, you've got obviously tax-free or tax-deferred earnings. And you can do it through various entities. You can do it through an LLC, you can do it through a 401k. There is one thing, although it is tax advantaged and in most cases can be tax-free. There is something called the UBTI and there's also a UBFI. And what these taxes are, it's the unrelated business taxable income. And the UBI is the unrelated business financial income, financed income, excuse me. And what that really says is, depending on the vehicle in which you do get the non-recourse loan, you could be, the IRA or whatever the account is, could be liable for taxes and for a portion of the income. And that portion of the income is the amount that's financed. So simply said, if you buy a property for $100,000, you have a loan for $60,000. The net profit on that $60,000 could be subject to tax based upon the taxes of the UBTI or UBFI. I'm not going to get into all the nuances because I would probably lead you astray, but that's something you need to talk to your tax advisor about as you look at these investments and look at getting a loan, as to what structure you're going to be using and whether you potentially could be subject to that. And that would, you have to file a tax return and those sorts of things. So I want you to be aware of that, but it's not something that we're going to get into here. The types of real estate that you can get into, residential and commercial. We do not do commercial properties, but some other institutions do. We do residential 1 to 4 family and multifamily units. But you can buy an office building, you can buy whatever you choose to do as long as you meet all the criteria for the disqualified persons and you have a financial institution that is willing to lend to those things. And I know at least NASB does lend to commercial properties. I don't know what the parameters are, but that's not something that we allow. You obviously can diversify your portfolio by having a revenue stream off of real estate. And if you were to have multiple types of properties in there, you obviously, get rental income off the rental of a house, off an office building. So you do have multiple sources of income coming in. What is a non-recourse loan? Again, it is a transaction that the bank is lending the IRA or an LLC owned by the IRA money based solely on the value of the real estate, the income of the real estate, with no personal liability to the owner of the IRA, nor is there any personal liability or any liability to the IRA itself. The only thing the bank can attach to is the real estate. So, and the rental income off that real estate. So that's why you will typically find that the IRA, that the non-recourse loans will be at a lower loan to value than, say, a home mortgage that you're going out and buying a house. Because the bank only has one way to get their money out if the IRA were not to settle, to make its payments, and that is to liquidate the collateral. Eligibility, again, all the same things that Brittany said. There's a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, a solo 401k, or an LLC owned by any of these. And the LLC could be have more than one member. You could have a couple of members in it, a couple of separate IRAs that go in there. You can even do it where there is an IRA and a separate individual. There are accounting issues that you need to deal with, and again, it can't be someone that is a disqualified person, but you can actually do that. And we've lent in a couple situations where there's been multiple members, and it's a little more complicated, but it can be done. Again, 1 to 4 families, multifamilies. You can also, we do, and I think some of the other banks do, we'll also lend if you're not doing a long-term rental, but you're doing Airbnb, VBRO property. You know, it has worked very well for those people that have used it for that. So how does it work? We have an application that you have to fill out. It's a pretty short application because, again, we're really not looking at the individual so much as we are looking at the property itself. With the application, we need to have a copy of driver's license of the IRA owner. We do require that they provide us with verification of income. And again, we're not having them as having recourse, but we want to make sure that they have income to live off of, irregardless of this property, because we don't want to be in a situation where the individual has a reliance on this property to be able to subsidize their living, and you know, we're competing for the money at that point in time. We also run a credit bureau on the individual that is the IRA owner. Again, not because there's recourse, but we do want to make sure that the individual that is the owner of the IRA has a history of making their payments on time. I mean, that has been a good indicator of whether the IRA or whatever the entity is will make its payments. So we do run that credit. We have turned people down because they have insufficient credit. And we've also turned people down simply because we didn't feel as though there was sufficient income to be able to make the transaction work. So although we're not relying on that and don't get that going forward, we do want to make sure that that people we're dealing with are upstanding, loan-paying people, and that they do have some source of income outside of the property. What are the advantages of doing it with a non-recourse loan as opposed to doing it all cash? If you own a property and you've paid all cash for it, we can give you money out to go buy another property, or to put into another investment, or to do improvements to the property that you have. You obviously can purchase properties. We can do a transaction where you go out and buy the property, and we provide our portion of the loan. The IRA provides its down payment, and the property then gets transferred to the entity that owns it, which is the IRA or some vehicle of the IRA. You can do cash out refinances. We will refinance other banks' loans. We'll also refinance a property that's owned free and clear. In fact, we just approved one today for a IRA that's bought the property for cash, did a bunch of renovation work, has owned it for a number of years, and wants to do some more renovation and have some liquidity so that it can then go out and potentially buy another property. So all those things can be done depending on who you deal with. Some of the financial institutions won't refinance their existing loans, or won't refinance other loans based on loan to value or whatever it happens to be. What happens if the IRA defaults on the loan and the bank then has to seek legal action? Well, again, because it's a non-recourse loan, the IRA is not responsible. So any asset outside of the piece of real estate and the rental income stream off that piece of real estate are not subject to any action by the bank. So the only alternative we have is to go after the property, which again is why we do a lower loan to value, why we have debt service coverage requirements, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes, because we've got to make sure that the property itself is going to be able to support the loan. Again, what types of entities, we're going over those, solo 401k, Roth IRA, traditional IRA. We've not done any with SEPSA, though I'm sure it's probably able to do it. We do offer the program in all 50 states, and we've done them in most of the states. I don't know if we've hit all of them, but pretty close. What are the terms that are available? We go 3, 5, 7, 10-year balloons, which really means that the loan is, say, if it's a 10-year loan, the loan is for 10 years. It is fixed for 10 years. The payments are calculated as though it's on 20 years. And at the end of 10 years, you have to refinance the property, whether it be with us or whether it be with somebody else. That final balance comes due. And it's the same thing with the 3, 5, and 7 years. We do not offer fully amortizing loans. Some of the other institutions do, but that's just not something that we have offered. It's the processing time. Typically, we're going to be looking at 30 to 45 days from approval to close. And most of that time is going to be taken up by third parties, appraisers, title insurance companies. We do have our documents done by outside legal counsel to ensure that they are compliant with IRS regulations, so we don't get you guys in trouble with the transaction. So that takes some time. But if everything were to go smoothly, we could close in 2 or 3 weeks period of time. We typically say 30 to 45 days because it just inevitably seems to take that long. Liquidity requirements. Ours happen to be that if the loan is on a property that doesn't have a tenant in it, or the majority of the property, if it's a 3-unit and only 1 unit is leased, or it's a office building, whatever it happens to be, if the majority of it is not leased, we do require that the borrower, which would be the entity that is owned by the IRA, whether it's the IRA itself or an LLC, we do require that they have 12 months worth of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance in the IRA or the checking account of the entity, whatever account that is. We do check that quarterly. However, if the property, when the property becomes leased, that requirement goes down to 6 months. If your monthly principal payment is $500, your taxes are $1,200, your insurance is $1,200. Your payment at that point in time would be what, $800 a month. So it'd be $4,800, assuming my math is correct. If the property's leased, if it's not, then it would be 12 months of that, so double that. And we check that quarterly. We do require that you provide statements for the entity on a quarterly basis, and we just review that to make sure that there is the money in the account. And if it's not there, we typically will contact you and make sure that you make a contribution if you're able to, in order to get it to that dollar amount. We do have a debt service coverage, and what the debt service coverage really means is that for every dollar's worth of principal and interest payments, you have to have $1.20 in net operating income, which is the net operating income is your gross rents minus all the operating expenses. And by operating expenses, it's only those cash expenses. It's not inclusive of depreciation or amortization, if there happens to be in that. And also, we don't take into account the interest. So it's just your rent minus utilities, if there's utilities, property management, taxes, repairs, and those sorts of things. And we divide that by the total amount of the payments, the principal and interest payments on the property. And if there were to be, say, seller financing, which is possible, it would take into account both the bank's financing and the seller's financing. So you simply do the math and divide the payments into what the NOI is, and you come up with a number, and it has to be at least 120 or more. And what we have seen, just as an aside here, what we've seen more so than properties not appraising for enough to get to the 60% loan to value, what we have seen is that a lot of properties don't generate enough income to get to the 60% loan to value. In fact, the loan I mentioned earlier today, the property's worth about $300,000 based on what we've been able to determine. And but the rental income is such that after the NOI, that we can only do about $110,000 loan, which is obviously significantly less than 60%. But that's all the property debt services. So there's really two criteria that you have to look at. One is the value of the property. The other one is the income that is generated off the property. And the two of those together really comes to how much we can lend on any particular property. Fees and costs. There is an origination fee. In regular mortgage terminology, that's points. And it's anywhere from 1% to 3%. What makes it 1% as opposed to 3% is kind of the whole package. The individual's credit and income, and the property, its loan to value, or we anticipate the loan to value to be, how good the debt service coverage is. We see properties, and I think I've got a couple of examples where it's the debt service coverage is 160. That will go into the equation just as it goes into the interest rates to determine what rate and what fee is going to be charged. There is a $250 underwriting fee. For us, there is a $2,000 attorney fee. This is actual fees to the bank that are charged for the loan documentation. We have a third-party law firm that's based here in Grand Rapids, which is where I am, Grand Rapids, Michigan, that does our loan documents, and they ensure that they are compliant with both the state laws as far as the recording of documents and those sorts of things, and also compliant with IRS regulations so that we don't put someone in a situation where we invalidate their account and create a taxable event for them. In addition, you have the typical real estate related items: title insurance, taxes, insurance, survey appraisal, the recording fees, and settlement fees, whatever those happen to be with regard to the location that you're doing the transaction in. Some states, state of New York is an example. This isn't a fee that the borrower pays, but they have a mortgage recording fee that is based on the total value of the mortgage that the bank pays. So those vary in all the states, and those would be, to each one of the transactions would be different. So we also do require that there be a property tax escrow. And for those of you that have property tax escrows on your house, this works exactly the same way. We do require that money be put aside every month to have enough money in an account to be able to pay the taxes when they come due. So in addition to your monthly principal and interest payment, there is an amount that's for the property taxes, and that's checked every year and analyzed every year to make sure that we have sufficient funds in there. Okay, here is a list of the documents that we require. As I mentioned, the loan application, a purchase or sales agreement if you are purchasing a property. Obviously, if you already own the property, then we don't need that. We do require the current statements on whatever the entity is that's going to own it, whether it be an IRA or 401k. Again, verifying liquidity. For those custodians that require an instruction form, we would need a copy of that. Then that would be totally dependent on who your IRA custodian is. We do require a copy of your photo ID front and back. You can thank the U.S. government for that. We make sure that everybody passes the OFAC list, and we have a picture of you so that the government can be safe from terrorism. Again, W-2s, we do require that or the first page of your IRA, of your tax return for the most recent year. Copy the lease if it's leased. If it's a multi-tenant property, we do require that there be a current rent roll. We want to know your insurance agent, real estate agent, title insurance company you prefer to use. If you don't have a title company that you prefer to use, we can get those. We have a company that will do it all across the United States, so we can get that taken care of. If it's a property that you presently own, if you have a copy of an old appraisal, that always is helpful. If not, we just look them up like everybody else does online and then go from there on an initial value and then obviously get an appraisal done. If you own it, if it's going to be owned in an LLC, we need the LLC documents, the operating agreement, articles of organization, tax ID number, and whatever. There is a certificate of good standing in some states. In some states there aren't. We do require whatever document from the state that you happen to be in to verify that the entity is a legal entity that's been recognized by the state government, sort of like in Miracle on 36th Street. We want verification that Santa Claus lives. These loans are typically, as I mentioned earlier, 60% loan to value. Unless it's a short-term rental, Airbnb, VBRO property, then we limit that to 50%. We do have the quarterly liquidity statements, as I had mentioned. We do require that you have information, as much information on the property as possible. Our rates run somewhere between the 6% range and the 7.5% range. Again, those are dependent on how long the loan's for, the property debt service, all those sorts of things. We take typically, we say 3 to 5 business days. Usually it only takes a couple business days once we have all the information to be able to approve or not approve the loan transaction. And then from then it's 30 to 45 days to go to close. Again, that could be shorter depending on the appraisals and title insurance. If that comes through quicker, we certainly have no issue with closing them as quickly as possible. Then I added just a couple here at the end, a couple of examples of types of properties we've done and circumstances that we've done. The first one is three properties. These were in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. 3 properties that were financed by another lender. They had gone back to that lender and wanted to refinance them and get some cash out to purchase some other properties. And the lender that did the transaction originally was not interested in refinancing their debt, so they came to us. We were able to do it. They did a 10-year term. We were able to put it together. This one took a little longer because it was 3 properties, and 2, there were some issues. They did this in an LLC, and they had to get some things straightened out on their LLC in order to be able to do it. Here's another property that we did. This one happens to be in Tennessee. It's just not too far from Dollywood. They purchased this property. This husband and wife who owned two separate IRAs that were the LLC, members of the LLC. Also owned a property that was an Airbnb type property in the same general area. And they owned that outside of their IRA. They wanted to do one in their retirement account. So we were able to do this. It was a $250,000 purchase, and we financed 125 of that. This was an interesting loan. Gentleman bought 8 properties in Oklahoma, all single family residences, all of them in the $42,000 to $45,000 range. Put them all into one loan transaction. We gave them release provisions so that if they sold a property, we'd know what to do. And we're able to put that together for them, and had a nice debt service coverage on that one. And then we did one up not too far from Green Bay, or not too far from Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin. An Airbnb, it's a single family house in a residential neighborhood, and unbeknownst to me, there's a lot of short-term rentals in Green Bay, Wisconsin. A lot of people apparently go up there for the weekend for football games. So this gentleman bought the property for $129,000. We financed $65,000. It turned out a very nice transaction for us, and he's doing very well with the property. And with that, I've finished my presentation. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you, Scott. That was very informative. Let's see here if we have any. I didn't see any come across. We covered a lot. It looks like it was just the question regarding the recording. Oftentimes people do, as we're speaking right now, start typing questions. So I sometimes like to just give a couple minutes of time around this point for people to enter questions as they've just digested everything that you've covered. So as we're waiting to see if we get additional questions, just a reminder that the session's being recorded. So each of you that registered, whether or not you attended, will get an email from us with a copy of the recording. There should also be a short survey available at the end of this for you to provide some feedback on the quality of the presentation. And if you have any suggestions for the future or topics that you'd like to see, we always love to hear from you as far as what you're interested in. So we also have provided our contact information. While we're waiting, maybe what I'll do is just back up a second here and let everybody either take a picture of this or write it down. If you want to get in touch with Scott and chat further.
Yeah.
Your website's there as well. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Feel free to contact me. I answer emails as quickly as I can, and always available to speak on the phone. I'll answer whatever questions I can answer. And if you have a property that you want to know whether that would be something that might qualify, we can certainly look at it and give you our estimation of what we would be able to do with it. Whether someone else might be able to do something differently or not, I don't know.
Sounds good. All right, if you don't mind, I'm going to I don't see any questions coming through yet. Oh, we did get a comment here. We got a thank you for the informative webinar. So you're welcome. We're glad you found it to be informative. Of course, in an hour's time, we're usually just skimming the surface of a lot of these, both of these topics are pretty complex, and they can be. So I'm sure that some of you may think of questions or other things after you've kind of thought about this a little bit more. And by no means is, the amount of time I took to go over self-directed IRAs enough time for someone to fully understand and feel comfortable being ready to make an investment if this is the first time you're hearing about it. I know we have a blend of different levels of experience in the session today. So if you feel more comfortable having a one-on-one conversation, feel free to reach out following the webinar. All right, with that, I don't think we do have any questions. Hopefully that's a sign that we've covered a lot of information and it's being processed. So I'll go ahead and end the webinar here. I just want to thank everyone again for taking time out of your afternoon, and especially want to thank Scott for joining us today and sharing his wealth of knowledge on non-recourse loans. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to hear from you soon. Take care. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you.